I'm so pleased to be joining, as has been called, this historic night. It is a history-making here at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. We're in the Nala Buddha Baru building, and that name means seeing waters. I tend to think that it reminds us of the sustaining waters of Cape York, of the rivers, the wetlands, the ocean, which are so profoundly and deeply entwined with the beauty, the history and the culture of the people and the place we're celebrating tonight from over the last 3 decades. I want to start by thanking Nolene for her beautiful welcome. It's so nice to be welcomed before we all arrived in, and to take that moment to reflect on her people in La Perouse, and to note that we are on Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to all Gadigal. I'm now spending quite a bit of time on Camaragal land on the other side of the harbour, and we look back at Gadigal land and I think a lot about what history has meant for the Eora nation in this city. I acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past and present. But I also really want to acknowledge all of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here tonight who come from so many lands across our extraordinary continent, particularly the Cape York Leaders Program students who I was able to spend some time with as we were coming in, who are from Queensland. But how remarkable, how wonderful to meet those young Aboriginal students, Torres Strait Islander students who are working hard to fulfil the promise of the Cape York Partnership. And I also want to thank the Hopevale Generational Band. No better way to come into an event than to the Gibson family and that remarkable band, and then the Cape York Aboriginal Australian Academy kids from Hopevale and Cohen, not only playing instruments, dancing, singing in language, in English, welcoming us all to such a great night. So I want to thank them all for making sure we're going to get this night off to a really great start. A few acknowledgements. Danny Gilbert, AM Chair of the Cape York Partnership. Danny, I've known you for a very long time. One of my first bosses at Gilbert and Tobin, and we've done many, many things together over many years. Some things involving your leadership at Cape York, but many other things. It's wonderful to be here with you. Fiona Jose for welcoming us here, Group Executive of the Cape York Partnership. So wonderful just to sit with you and to hear your aspirations and to listen to you. I hope to get to know you better. The board members of the Cape York Partnership and the staff here tonight. We're going to hear from Kirsty Davis later, and I can't wait to hear her words that she'll be sharing with us. Tammy Williams, the FRC Commissioner. There are many people I had here who aren't here tonight, but one of them I do want to acknowledge who's not in, that's Anne Sherry AO. I spoke with her this afternoon. Sadly, she just couldn't get down to be here with us, but I know that Michael Hogan will do a fantastic job representing Anne tonight. We're all great friends and have known each other for a long, long time. There are many others here that are friends. Tanya Hosh, we spent a lot of time in footy, but also in life, doing many, many things. Paul Briggs AO, I think, is here. Anna Bligh, AC. Anna, your role as Queensland Premier at incredibly important times for the Cape York Partnership, for Noel and the work he did for communities around Queensland. I know you adopted many of Noel's recommendations, and it's important that you're here. Daryl Rigney, one of the co-chairs of Jarwin, and Shane Webster, CEO of Jarwin. I want to acknowledge Karen Bayliss, AM. Where's Karen? There you are, Karen. So we go back a way too, and first met each other at Insurance Australia Group. I want to acknowledge you not just now as Chair of Save the Children Fund, but an extraordinary leader of Jarwin across many years as Chief Executive. The Cape York Partnership alumni, current Cape York Leadership Program students, and the staff of the Cape York Partnership. There are many, many more people I want to acknowledge just very quickly. There's the many generous and engaged philanthropists that are here tonight, supporters of Cape York Partnership and all of its work over decades. Many departmental senior leaders representing government who have been very supportive. Gabby Traynor, I think AO, is here. Again, someone deeply involved in all of this work. Colin Carter. I saw Colin a few minutes ago. There's Colin. It's so nice to see you, Colin. We worked a lot on the AFL Commission together when I joined. It was big work you were doing to get a woman involved in the AFL, but also to engage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our great game. You and I travelled, I think it was in 2008, to South Africa on the Flying Boomerang tour with Derek Kickett and a number of very senior Aboriginal players who acted as mentors for those young men we took, mostly 13, 14, 15-year-olds who had never left their community, let alone the country. Stephen May was one of those young boys, and if you know anything about footy, and know that Stephen May is now a strapping mid-30-year-old extraordinary player who I get to see occasionally and remind him of me being one of the aunties on the trip that looked after all those young boys. Julia Davison, Natalie Walker, Danella Mills, chair of NACCHO, and Dawn Casey, the deputy CEO of NACCHO. As I said, I could go on because I know so many of you, but everyone here, I'm sure, the Cape York Partnership would say are distinguished and important guests. It really is a great honour for Simeon and me to be here with you on this historic night. 30 years ago, the Cape York Agenda was a radical blueprint for the transformation of Indigenous communities through acceptance of personal and community responsibility. It remains for me one of the best examples of the clarity and consistency of Aboriginal aspiration and leadership, particularly in establishing a well-reasoned Aboriginal system with ambition for children and their futures at its core. It doesn't surprise me that we start with children tonight, of all ages, right through to the students. I spoke to Jason Glanville, who'll be known to some of you this afternoon, and he explained what was going on back then better than I could. He said it was nation building led by nation builders way before that term was popular in the public policy sphere. And Sim and I know, having worked with many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across many years, now decades for Sim, it's clear that the Cape York Partnership changed the kind of seat that First Nations people had at the table, particularly with government, but also with others, putting them closer to the head of the table, and today often chairing the rooms where those tables are. From its earliest time, as I said, it was radical and pioneering, one of the very few efforts across the country in both words and deeds that flatly rejected the prevailing narrative of deficits. The Cape York Partnership led and inspired new narratives, sometimes and often necessarily critical of existing systems, but always proposing system transformation. An ever-evolving case study of the positivity created when Aboriginal wisdom and knowledge systems are respected and supported, led by Aboriginal people and their communities, in trusted partnership with others. And many of those partners are here tonight and remain trusted. Now, although he can't join us tonight, and I think Gerhard can't join us either, I wanted to pay tribute to Noel Pearson, who from those early days, you would know this, drew some of his inspiration from the philosophies of Nobel laureate and author Amartya Sen. And of course, prior to the partnership, both Noel and Gerhard expanded the Cape York Land Council. It was the first big land council in Cape York, and since its inception has been the leader in Queensland for professional native title services. As you would know, many large native title claims have been run by the Cape York Land Council, including the Wick case famously. The Land Council, given gravitas by Noel and Gerhard, went on to secure native title determinations across most of the Cape, an extraordinary outcome. But joined by an exceptional group of supporters, including many of the people in this room here tonight, Noel changed the system. His 1990 speech and paper, Our Right to Take Responsibility, detailed the effect of welfare dependency and charted the course to the partnership model. When reflecting some years later, and as she confirmed with me this afternoon, Anne Sherry said it was one of Noel's first real speeches about how welfare was killing his people, and it was incredibly powerful. When I spoke to Anne this afternoon, she reminded me that there was a ragtag group of people who were in the room to hear that speech, who got together. I think, Colin, you were there, a number of others that were there in that moment, and just said, what are we going to do? We've got to partner up. And so the partnership model that then emerged ensured that Cape York people could have the capabilities to choose a life they had reason to value, taking responsibility where opportunities and self-reliance could actually flourish. As he said many, many times and still does, a hand up, not a handout. In 2002, I invited Noel to speak to the leadership team of IAG, Insurance Australia Group, then Australia's largest insurance company. We were trying to change the culture around the country and engage senior executives in what was happening in parts of the country. And we invited Noel to come and speak to the group, about 200 of us Karen might remember it. Karen, you were at that event. He was unrelenting and unapologetic in what he laid on us all at that time. It built on his 1999 paper. It was wonderful that Karen was there because, of course, as I've said, Jarwin was in its infancy, and it may well be that those words of Noel at the time then spurred you on to do the extraordinary work that you did at Jarwin. But he talked about the need to build capability and capacity and turn aspiration into action. And what followed was the corporate, philanthropic and government partnerships that were grounded in people. Some call it human capital, but it's people, people to people, and friendship and understanding that underpinned everything. It was key. But these relationships weren't just about friendship. They were adding practicality and ensured that enterprise and education was at the centre of progress. Now, many of you have played such an important role, from Danny, who I've mentioned, the earliest partners, Westpac, the Boston Consulting Group, the Body Shop. You've been joined by many, many more that have helped the partnership, grown the partnership. It's probably the best example of effective brokers of change that you could use in the Australian and probably the global context, if we're honest about it. Today, the partnership continues to work to empower Indigenous families and communities to strive for lives of value, freedom and prosperity. And now there's 10 entities working on the ground, and the policy design and leadership practiced by the Cape York Institute continues to have widespread effect. I think your Palmer Futures Agenda is a single cohesive reform paper that was developed for the people of Cape York by the people of Cape York. So today, that radical agenda first set out 30 years ago is still being felt across our country. It still has a lot of hard work to do, sadly, I think. In my role as your Governor-General, I have the privilege now of seeing Australia from both a panoramic view and a fine-grained perspective. I go to a lot of places together with Sim often. I've seen the Cape York Partnership Agenda reflected, adapted, adopted and interpreted in communities and organisations right across the country. In July, I had the immense privilege on all of your behalves to take a team with me to Gumitland. We're surrounded by his family. I was honoured to preside over the posthumous investiture of Dr. G. Yunupingu with the highest civilian honour in our country, the AC, the Companion of the Order of Australia. Now, Dr. Yunupingu's family and the Yolngu community had been quite clear it had to be on Gumitland. They led the ceremony, and we were guided by the family's wishes and traditions in presenting that award with a remarkable consideration of Yolngu and Ballanda ceremony and tradition. We were on red earth in the warm afternoon light of the Northern Territory with Yolngu dancing, Gumit practices. I was very proud, as I said, on your behalf to present the Order of Australia insignia to a very emotional Dr. Yunupingu's daughter, Binmilla Yunupingu, and to celebrate his exceptional leadership. I know he was a very important man in Noel Pearson's life and in the life of the Cape York Partnership. He said during his life, our ceremonial grounds are our universities, where we gain the knowledge that we need. In late October, just a few weeks ago, together with the Prime Minister, I travelled to the Northern Territory to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the handback of Uluru Katajuta to the Ananu. As we gathered in the shadow of Uluru with its ever-changing colours as our backdrop, still sparkling from the rain of a very dramatic thunderstorm overnight, I saw again the connecting power of land and community as generations of Ananu performed an Inma. In the dance and storytelling of the men and women, the elders, the teenagers, and just like today, the little children, we saw the constant teaching of the youngest Ananu by their elders. It was a living link of ancient tradition and a vital sustaining culture led by and determined by Ananu. And last week, in a very modern context, I welcomed former Olympic runner. He doesn't like to be called this anymore. He likes to be called a reconciliation agent now, Rob de Castella, and 54 students from 8 schools across Australia, the remotest communities across Australia, and their teachers, participants in the Indigenous Marathon Foundation's ICAN program. They'd come to Government House in Canberra as part of 3 days of running activities. They could only come if they'd been going to school. They were taking responsibility. They wanted the reward to come to Canberra and run. They joined 2 youth runners and their coaches from Ethiopia, the first time that the Ethiopians had joined as part of a DFAT running program that links Aboriginal young children with the Ethiopian runners, and they played relay races and played on the grounds of Government House just as it should be. As patron of IMF, it was my opportunity to thank the ICAN and IMF teams for the meaningful difference they make in the lives of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who, in the model of the Cape York Leadership Program, are supporting these children to be strong in culture and to belong while taking steps to build their future, but always taking responsibility for what lies ahead. And Rob had just got back from New York, where 13 athletes from remote communities around the country, a couple from Cape York, had finished the New York Marathon. They had been accompanied by Jonathan Thurston, JT, and Buddy Franklin as their guides, who didn't run as fast as the students, but got through it just. I'm patron of many Aboriginal organisations, and proudly so. The Go Foundation for Adam Goods and Michael O'Loughlin, the Clontarf Foundation, the Australian Indigenous Education Foundation, and now Simeon and I are joint patrons of the Indigenous Centre of Excellence at the University of Western Sydney. We get to see the many opportunities and to celebrate the commitment of all of those organisations, but I think they are all rooted in the Cape York Partnership. It's the amplification of the power of culture, knowledge and community in the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the foundation of recognition and empowerment. I'm almost finished, I know we're running late, but when I was sworn in as your Governor-General in July 2024, I quoted Noel in my address to the Senate. I like to steal, but openly steal, his formulation of the great story of our nation. 65,000 years of First Nations history, generously shared with all who have come since. The British period that brought us many of our democratic institutions, of course I represent one of those quite obviously, and the last 50, 60 to 80 years of migration and refugee arrivals. During the course of the next month, we will welcome the 1 millionth refugee to Australia to hopefully settle well here as part of our wonderfully diverse community. These are the braided elements that shape the story of our modern, successful, diverse country, all grounded in 65,000 years of attachment to this continent with culture and leadership. I tell it wherever I travel, whether that's domestically or overseas, together with the commitment I've made to put care, kindness and respect at the core of everything I do during my term. And it's at the intersection of care and kindness and respect and modernity, optimism and visibility, the qualities that the Prime Minister asked me to embody when he invited me to serve, that I think lies the mosaic of success and belonging at the heart of our modern nation. Simeon and I have tried to represent that story in the official residences here in Sydney and in Canberra to ensure that every visitor, particularly First Nations visitors, feel that their story is represented there in some way. In the art on the walls, the books on the shelves, the artefacts, the stories that are told and the events we host. We're endeavouring to make sure these places are open to all Australians. They're not my home or Simeon's home. We have the honour of working and staying in those places, but they are homes for all Australians. And just last January, I was hosting an event for Indigenous Australian Engineering School at the University of New South Wales, and I discovered a young Aboriginal student standing in a corner of Admiralty House. We couldn't find him, and he had tears in his eyes. He was standing before a Sally Gabori painting that now hangs in the official study. It's glorious. I asked him why he was so emotionally connected and didn't want to leave the room, and he said he was so deeply moved to see his home, Mornington Island, his country, in the official residence of the Governor-General of Australia. He said he didn't think he belonged until that moment. I had a bit of a cry too, to be honest. Rhoda Roberts subsequently pointed out to me that if you stand looking at Sally Gabori's painting from Mornington Island, look across to the Opera House, you should remember that in 1973 it was the Mornington Island Aboriginal dancers that first danced in the Opera House to open that great building just across from Admiralty House. The story needs to be told. I also share the story of Arakoon by the late Cape York artist Mavis Nalamata in the dining room. It's a grand, big healing painting. And late Noongar artist Paddy Bedford hangs in the entrance hall at Admiralty House with his magnificent medicine pocket painting, something to welcome everybody to these houses. You know, modern Australia's future, stable, prosperous and optimistic, rests on our enduring understanding of and gratitude of those 65,000 years of continuous Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, the celebration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, cultures and rights as part of our shared national identity, and our recognition of past wrongs as the pathway to healing. And this is the future that we realise through the Palmer Futures Agenda. It's called New and Empowering Partnerships. Congratulations on setting up your new pathway: education, employment, economic empowerment, finding pathways out of the criminal justice system and enabling future leaders to flourish. You are continuing as Cape York Partnership to forever change the landscape of what we expect of success. I want to say something to Tanya, who's hosting us tonight. Your piece in The Australian, just the last few days, was so powerfully a grand portrayal of the intersection through the Cape York Partnership Leaders Program. You were, of course, the first student supported by that vision that became the Cape York Leaders Program. Going on to design the model, you were also the youngest person ever elected to ATSIC and our 2008 Young Australian of the Year, just a couple of years ago. Emerging from your mother's fierce love for you, her determination to forge a path to the future, and Noel's act of generosity that enabled you to follow that path through your education at Clayford College, the Leaders Program has gone on to deliver the most profound consequences for the students of Cape York and their communities. As you say in the piece, 94% of those enrolled in the program who reach Year 12 graduate. 70% go straight into work or future study, acquiring skills and income to forge their future paths and lift their communities as leaders and role models. And the partnerships programs in cultural stewardship, financial management and workforce participation reflect the same empowerment of the Palmer, the people of Cape York. Tonight, Simeon and I join everyone here in celebrating the wisdom of teaching, of hope, of empowerment and optimism that rested with the elders who established the partnership 30 years ago, and the elders of today who continue to act with the same jealous regard, as Noel has so beautifully described it, for the people of Cape York today. Together in partnership, you're continuing to create fundamental structural change to transform what happens to your community and your land in a dialogue that puts your active voice at the centre of decision making. So congratulations for 3 decades. The work goes on. In a contested, somewhat difficult world that we now live in, I kind of sometimes feel it's a pretty radical act to put care at the centre of a Governor-General's activities. But it remains radical and it remains important that you continue to pursue the agendas that you started 30 years ago. We've never needed more, a new radicalism. We need to still work together, to do it together in partnership, but led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ambition. I'll just finish with Tanya's words in the end of the article in The Australian in case you didn't see it. She says, the success of CYP is in its design. It is based on high expectation and family responsibility. When parental love meets institutional opportunity, the gap can close. To policymakers, stop funding failure. Fund what works. And to the young ones, you belong in every room where decisions are made. Walk in, reach Year 12, and when you have your life before you, turn back and hold the door open for the next kid with a suitcase and a dream. As long as I'm in the role as Governor-General, I'll continue to support and celebrate the work of the Cape York Partnership, celebrate 30 years, look forward to many, many more. Keep being radical, keep teaching us, and make sure you hold us to account as a nation, because we've got a lot of work to do and we can only do it in partnership.